Tartaria, or the Old World Order, as it's now referred to, is a conspiracy theory that argues that most of our historical narrative is fake. One way we can know that the narrative is fake, according to the Old Worlders, is by examining Western historical architecture. They make the claim that it was impossible for the people in the historical narrative, primarily those in the 18th and 19th centuries, to have built cities and structures that looked this good, and this grand, and in such a short time frame. They argue that the only way this was possible is if these structures were actually built with advanced technology, and are a lot older than the historical narrative says they are. Old Worlders don't believe it would have been possible to build like this with traditional methods. They scoff at the idea of horse and cart. They deliberately ignore much of the Industrial Revolution steam technology that was around when most of these structures were built. And many of them don't just believe it was done with advanced technology, but they also believe that Europeans, or the early Americans, didn't build these structures at all, but that they are the remnants of a previous civilization, perhaps giants, or, as the name Tartaria suggests, people from Tartary, or the eastern part of this world. 5 or so years ago, I too fell for this conspiracy theory. And although I still, to this day, release videos on hidden or conspiracy history, in April of 2022, I publicly changed my stance on the Tartaria, or Old World Order, hypothesis. I had come across way too much evidence that proved that yes, we did indeed build these structures. That no, they are not impossible to build, and therefore I needed to change my stance publicly. To continue making videos in this vein not only would have been dishonest, but something had forever changed in my heart. I no longer felt comfortable with participating in the historical erasure of not only my ancestors, but also the ancestors of others. I no longer felt okay with belittling their achievements in construction and engineering. I no longer felt that it was right to mock with arrogance and incredulity. One of the key arguments that the Old Worlders make is that the old construction photographs are actually fake or photoshopped. They use the evidence of early historical photographic manipulation to support their claims that the photographs detailing the construction of these structures are all fake or heavily manipulated, that they are just a cover-up to hide the advanced technology and the different people who were really responsible for building all the glory. In November 2022, I released a collaborative video with Wood and Nichols that highlighted a major flaw within this argument. It focuses on the fallacy of cherry-picking and the danger that such an argument poses to the Tartarian or Old World Order hypothesis. Unfortunately, at 13,000 views, the video got striked by one of the Old World creators. We should have known better to engage with their material in a fair use and journalistic manner. This wasn't about getting to the truth or participating in honest discussion for them. Instead of engaging with our arguments in a critical and fair way, it was easier for some to ignore them and try and get the video removed from the public eye. But the argument and points raised by myself and Wood and Nichols in the video are vital. They are vital to this discussion and the future of the Old World Order conspiracy. I recently received a comment on X that has propelled me to, once again, engage with this discussion about historical photographs. The commenter asked, "Do you ever feel that your old evidence was abandoned too quickly in light of new, potentially misleading evidence?" This is supposedly a picture of the Empire State Building mid-construction, and they attached a screenshot. It is a construction photograph of the Empire State Building. They have uploaded the photograph to fakeimagedetector.com. As you can see, fake image detector indicates that it looks like a computer-generated or modified image. Artificial intelligence is changing our lives, and it's doing it rapidly. And it's no wonder that with the rise of AI image generation, that people would immediately think back to the past and question whether this technology was already around and being used to fabricate certain historical narratives. And the response here from Fake Image Detector suggests that maybe this construction photograph is actually an AI-generated digital image and has been used to fool us. For those that promote the Tartarian or Old World Order narrative, they will inevitably take this as proof that these images are fake. But unfortunately for them, all it takes is a quick play around with other construction photographs from even earlier time periods to see that no, it doesn't classify a lot of these as fake, but as genuine and real. When I pointed this out to the person who left the comment on my feed, I didn't get a response. But this instance really does encapsulate the Tartarian advocate's relationship with old photographs. It is one of cherry picking, of highlighting what supports their ideas and ignoring what doesn't. And it reminded me of that video that myself and Wooden Nichols made. On the 25th of May 2024, Stu Peters alongside Sean Hibbler will be releasing a movie promoting this conspiracy theory. It's called Old World Order.
As modern Americans, we've been spoon-fed this dumbed-down, cartoonish, simplified version of history. You see, according to their version of history, the rest of us were just a bunch of bumbling idiots. And so, of course, they had no choice but to seize control and force progress. But it's all a lie. It's all fake. It's all bullshit. And that's why the Stu Peters Network, together with Sean Hibbler, is releasing a new film titled Old World Order. We're going to pull the mask off of our nation's real history. For more on this, we're now joined by Sean Hibbler, the director of that film and CEO of Hibbler Productions. Sean, you've done a tremendous amount of work in this film, and only you can tell the audience what they can expect.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Stu.
Yeah,
hello to your wonderful audience. Old World Order's kind of a 101 introduction to this PSYOP, really, because a lot of people don't know about it. They've heard about it, or they'll hear the word Tartaria.
Yes.
You know, that's just one piece of it. That's one empire. That's where Russia was. Okay, I mean, that's where Russia is now. That's where Tartaria was. It's one of many empires that were hidden from us. The reason, like you said earlier, that they wanted to hide it is because, well, number one, they don't want people to know that we didn't build these buildings. And when you look at some of these construction photos of the past, and this will be in the film, okay, for everyone doubting this topic, you're going to see what's going to happen here. There was a company called the Detroit Publishing Company. Okay. They were known for photoshopping. Back in the day, it was Victorian photography manipulation. Okay, they would actually go in the dark room, in the negative room back in the day, and they would etch and mask things. They would take a building and put it here. They would take a building out and remove it and make a white sky there. It's called vanilla sky. This is how they manipulated our history, through fake construction photos and through taking credit of, oh, we built these buildings. But when you look at the timeline, you'll notice that it's impossible.
Both Stu and Hibbler have a far larger audience than I do, and much more reach and influence. I think it's only right for others to have proper access to a different side of the argument, because this is not material that should be taken lightly. It's to do with the topic of historical erasure and the achievements of our ancestors. It is not something to play around with, but to treat with respect, dignity, and honesty. And so as a result, I am re-uploading a director's cut of mine and Wooden Nichols' video that discusses the flaws inherent in arguing that all old construction photographs are fake. And please do note, this video was released almost 2 years ago, and it was a response to a video that the channel Mind Unveiled made. In re-uploading this here, I am not, in any way, shape or form, intending to demean Mind Unveiled. nor do I encourage anyone else to do so in the comments as a result of this video. A year and a half is a long time, and people change. They mature, they develop their understanding further, and they progress. What Mind Unveiled was arguing a year or so ago may not be what they believe today. In my opinion, they have moved beyond the Tartarian or Old World Order hypothesis and onto more interesting topics. Their videos on homunculus and the topic of alchemy are all very interesting and good fun. The reason I am re-uploading this is because it is an essential component to the discussion as to whether the Tartarian or Old World Order hypothesis is a legitimate one or not. So without further ado, I present to you Ewar and Wooden Nichols' rebuttal of the all construction photographs are fake argument. Enjoy. So Mind Unveiled just released a really good video on old world 19th century photo manipulation. And it's good for many reasons. The first reason is it's very comprehensive. So it gives a really good overview of all the photo manipulation techniques that they could use. So, he talks about the sort of ghosting phenomena, where they trick people into thinking it was, spirits there in the photograph, to composite images and cropping and copying and pasting and removing people.
And I agree. I think it was a really good video. There were cases where he used Wikipedia, but then there was also cases where he was using books, the historical journals, which is the same thing that we do. So as a whole, I found it a really good video. Where he lost me is where he jumped to the conclusion that all photographs are fake.
Basically, all old world photos are fake.
And it kind of felt like it was straight out of the playbook of Ancient Aliens, where on that show, they're teaching you about these really interesting sites and you're getting into it. And then they come at you with their narrative where it was the ancient astronauts. And you're like, well, hold up now. Like, come on. Like, that was a really good presentation you were doing. The only other part that I would add in, I believe it was Legray. The research he did on Legray, where he showed that the sensitizing dyes actually could pick up skies back in the mid 19th century. I thought that was great because that was stuff I was unaware of. It certainly doesn't debunk the sensitizing dyes that leads to the vanilla sky narrative, but it adds to the story and shows that they could do that.
So I'm a bit confused in some ways because he does jump to these hasty generalizations and conclusions which don't really match with the information he was presenting. But also as well is that I don't know whether, because he's stopped using the word Tartaria, and I don't know whether this is in support of that hypothesis or not, but what he's presented actually delivers like a tremendous blow to the Tartarian hypothesis. Whether it's a verbal debate, an essay or an entire book, an argument is very similar to a chess game. And just like in chess, when you make an argument, you have to anticipate and try and foresee all your opponents and opposition's moves in advance. And it's the same in argument. When you're making an argument or you're in a debate, you're always trying to see the potential pitfalls of that argument. Initially, that should be done from an honest perspective because you want the argument to be correct. But once you feel like you have a correct argument, you still have to see those pitfalls because you will be challenged. When I talk about the weak spots in an argument, I mean like the holes, the contradictory statements, the weak areas without enough evidence, moments of hypocrisy, tautology, fallacy, when you suppress evidence and present different kinds of evidence in support of your argument, selectivity, bias. These are your weak areas in argument. And this is why I really like Mind Unveiled's latest video, because it draws to the surface the Tartaria hypothesis's biggest weakness. And it kind of corners it into a lose-lose situation. And that's the photo manipulation. A big part of the hypothesis relies on the viewer or the recipient believing that all construction photographs are fake.
And when you look at some of these construction photos of the past, and this will be in the film, okay, for everyone doubting this topic, you're going to see what's going to happen here. There was a company called the Detroit Publishing Company. Okay. They were known for photoshopping. Back in the day, it was Victorian photography manipulation. Okay, they would actually go in the dark room, in the negative room back in the day, and they would etch and mask things. They would take a building and put it here. They would take a building out and remove it and make a white sky there. It's called vanilla sky. This is how they manipulated our history, through fake construction photos and through taking credit of, oh, we built these buildings. But when you look at the timeline, you'll notice that it's impossible.
But what Mind and Val presents in this video is that photo manipulation occurred across all kinds of photographs. And what he shows is that they could remove people from photographs, remove them entirely. They could remove objects. He calls it vanilla sky. It's not. Vanilla sky is the oversensitizing dyes and the whitewashing due to the light. But the cropping of the sky and the cropping of certain buildings as well. He also shows instances where there's been artistic liberties. So, the producer of the photograph has etched onto the image and drawn things in there. But, as part of his conclusion, basically, and this is a direct quotation, all old world photos are fake.
Basically, all old world photos are fake.
And that's an extreme mindset because there's no evidence for that. There's evidence that there was manipulation in the same way there is today. One of his primary sources for the manipulated images is the Detroit Publishing Company. But the Detroit Publishing Company was a postcard company. And postcards by default are manipulated. And you see that here, especially with colorized photochrom. You see the way the edges are faded. You see that they emphasize good weather. And you see that they also remove objects that damage the composition of the photograph. So it's exactly the same as it is today with magazines, adverts, and, whatnot. And we make people look more beautiful today, just as they did back then. He states that photo manipulation has been around since the camera's inception. Well, that immediately tells us that, one, the Victorians were indeed advanced and not just horse and cart people. But most importantly, that two, the practice of image manipulation was exactly the same back then as it is today, just not as good. But that doesn't mean that all photographs are fake. So I can go to a construction site, take a photograph, come home, put it into the computer, crop out the sky, change the colors, increase the contrast, turn it to black and white. And that's a manipulated photo. But the construction site was still real. It still existed. So his conclusions are off, but it's problematic for the Tartarian hypothesis because he's showing that they could remove people. Now, a big part of the Tartarian hypothesis relies on the notion that the cities in the 19th century, a lot of them were empty. Where are all the people? Now, me and you have explained that it's a long exposure time. But Mind and Val kind of rejects that long exposure time in there and says that could be manipulated as well. And that's fine. Then why is it not possible that they just removed all the people from these images, these cityscapes, to make it a better image? And it's the same with the instances of cropping and copying and pasting. He shows a building being what he considers cropped and copied and pasted into the shot. And I think he says,
we can also see the same thing in this V3 version, where the building with the white band-aid now has similar scratchings to the middle building from V2, as if they were trying to take it out to use for other photos. Notice that ornamental border on the top? So is this an added building? It's a copy and paste building.
But then in the Tartarian hypothesis, this makes it very problematic because you have cityscapes, San Francisco, for example, or Melbourne, shots of Melbourne and Sydney in Australia. And people think, whoa, these were really built up for the 19th century. If we take Mind and Val's logic and reasoning here, then how did the advocates know that they didn't manipulate these photos to make the city seem larger and more populated through copy and pasting? We don't subscribe to this idea, but you can't cherry pick with this one. If all old world photos are fake, then this also needs to be considered as fake. And then you might say, well, why would they want to fake images of what the city looked like? But Mind and Veil kind of answers that without actually addressing it, is that if they were to fake photographs of cities and make them look a lot bigger and a lot more glorious than they were, especially in America and Australia, it would be propaganda and advertisements that draw in migration.
In terms of the World's Fairs, I feel like it also now throws all of the information that's been presented there, because those buildings don't exist for the most part anymore. There are some that are still standing today, but in the history books, they were built later, after the World's Fairs. Case in point with the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. It's on the record as being built, the permanent one you see today, in the 1960s, construction ended in the 1970s. There's one in Chicago. I think it became known as the Field Museum. And that construction started in the 1930s. So all those old glorious photos that we've seen of the World's Fairs, those are now out the window because you've admitted that all photographs are fake. That includes those. So the Tartaria hypothesis just lost the World's Fairs too.
Yeah, and with the World's Fairs as well, when you look at them, they look amazing in those old photographs. But if they were that good at touching up images, and he shows that, he shows how people were made to look more beautiful than they were. Well, then why wouldn't you do that with a fair? Of course you would. And you also get photographs of the fairs illuminated at night, and you think, whoa, they had all this amazing light systems and electricity. Again, the photo manipulation has to be applied there. It has to be applied to everything. So what me and you would do, and we said this in our photography video, is that every single photograph needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And it has to be evidence that there's traces of photo manipulation. And you could say, well, maybe they were that good that you can't even tell. And that's fine. But then you invalidate your entire argument and you invalidate your entire lens into the past, because then suddenly every single image is suspect. The cities of the past, the way they look, they don't look that way today. San Francisco does not look like it did in the 19th century. And it's the same with Sydney in Australia. It's the same all over the world. So if you're going to make a case that all historical images, photographs are fake or have the potential to be fabricated, you invalidate all your lens into the past. You no longer have an argument. Empty Cities is gone. World's Fairs is gone. So what me and you do, we try and take each photograph on a case-by-case basis. And there are crop-ins, and there are composite images, and there are images that have been used for propaganda, and postcards that have had the sky blue because it's tourist propaganda. You're saying, come here. But you can't cherry pick and use postcards as evidence that all construction photographs are fake. You have to see it for what it is. Sky changes, retouching, cropping, removing people are not evidence that we didn't build these structures. No, but it is evidence that they could make their photos look better and locations look a lot more enticing and welcoming. So now you have no solid foundation to argue that the cities of the past were even glorious. They may not have looked this good or been so built up. So what Mind Unveiled has done is brilliant, because he says,
and we should certainly be questioning any photos on the historical record and the level of retouching that has been done to these.
That also includes all the buildings that do not stand today, like the Singer building. Now you don't have that one anymore, because even though there are construction photos of it, even though there are photos of it existing, it doesn't stand today. We don't have evidence of it. The only evidence you had of it was in photographs, and it was classified as a Tartarian building. According to this new presentation and research, that building no longer exists anymore. You don't have an argument that the Singer building was Tartarian. The photos that Mind Unveiled have shared are obviously manipulated or altered. Anyone can see that just by looking at them. Now, they do find cases where they're in archives and they're not mentioned that they are manipulated. And I wouldn't immediately go and say, well, that means that there's a mass conspiracy taking place here and all photos are faked and manipulated. But from the photos that we presented on construction sites, whether it be the canal photos, it's very possible there may have been retouching somewhere along the way for restoration purposes. But for the most part, there is no evidence of it. They are basic photos taken with the basic cameras for the time period. To conclude, every photograph we've shared is doctored because photo manipulation is possible, is equivalent to coming to the conclusion every vocal musician uses auto-tune because auto-tune exists.
Yep, I agree. It's worth outlining too that documentary photography is different from architecture photography, which would have been taken by firms to demo their work, and from photographs that have been formatted for postcards, magazines, newspapers. I mean, it's quite obvious that with images where the sky's been cropped, or certain obstructions like buildings have been cropped, they were going to be processed for a different format. Just like the Singer building here, the photo on the left is the original, and it's been processed into this postcard on the right, and it's got a different sky and whatnot. And we still practice this form of photo manipulation today for publication. And there is also such a thing as art. Many artists today still merge painting and photography. We practice all of this more today than we ever have done. And it would be very easy for a generation in 100 years' time to find all of this and use it to hypothesize that we didn't exist, you know, and we're a historical fabrication. But that's not the case. Not everything is a lie, and not everything is truth. And there's a reason that I never use photo manipulation to support my arguments in LHFE, because it's cherry picking. And cherry picking is hypocrisy. Mind and Val concludes,
We must use other methods to question the official narrative outside of photographs that were given to the libraries and archive collections through these corporate publishing companies.
and we actually agree. It is time for the Tartarian advocates to use methods outside of photography to question the narrative. You can't make photo manipulation your central argument because, like we've said, it undoes all of your arguments. You don't have a lens into the past. You need to go to different methods of debunking history and especially construction. So there's a vast amount of available evidence that can be tested to demonstrate whether manual construction is possible or not. Steam machines still exist. You can go and test them out. You can build a Jim pole crane or a derrick crane out of wood and see if it can lift a load. And we do have evidence of people moving megalithic heavy stone manually. We have evidence we can carve stone. There's so much evidence out there that we can make bricks en masse. So that's where it needs to be debunked. You need to actually demonstrate that we can't do this stuff manually. And then you might have an argument. What I think he's done, he's put the Tartarian advocates into a very tricky position. You know, if they try to use his examples of photo manipulation as supporting evidence that all construction photographs are fake, then like we discussed, they lose major components to their hypothesis because you can't arbitrarily just cherry pick to suit your argument. And just to go back to when you showed Legray, I noticed it said down the bottom that he was buddies with Alexandre Dumas. He wrote a famous novel, The Count of Monte Cristo. Well, that's another area the advocates can attempt to debunk all the writers, because they wrote both fiction and social commentary. The world is captured very well in their texts. So as a starting point, that would be Dickens, the Brontes, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Victor Hugo, William Faulkner, Herman Melville. And then there is the archival newspaper documents in the millions, the documentation on construction. It's interesting that Mind Unveiled uses an old book on photo manipulation to support his argument. Why would a book like that be any more historically valid than this document outlining construction practices? So that's another area to turn to. So this is the royal fork. And this applies to argument. The royal fork is when the opponent's king is checked while their queen is also simultaneously marked. And the opponent is forced to move their king because they're checked, but in doing so, they forfeit their queen. And this is what Mind Unveiled has just done to the Tartarian hypothesis with this photo manipulation video. It's a lose-lose situation, because by using photo manipulation to support an argument that all construction photographs are fake, you invalidate all historical photographs and lose all central components that make up your hypothesis. You lose everything. So this is what he's done. He's put you into this. You know, the king is the hypothesis and the queen is photo manipulation. And they both can't exist here. So if you're going to move that over to keep the hypothesis going, then photo manipulation has to go. It just doesn't work.